House of Representatives holds valedictory session for late former Speaker Agunwa Adekwe. Reps probe abandoned $35 million modular refinery project in Bayelsa. And lawmakers move to end ASU strike, seeking lasting solution to university crisis. Hello and welcome to You and Your Reps, where we connect you to the conversations that shape life at the National Assembly. This week, from a valedictory tribute to a former speaker, to tough questions on abandoned projects and a renewed push to end the ASU strike, it is all about accountability, action, and national impact. I am Victor Azu. Let's begin. The House of Representatives has paid glowing tribute to one of its own, the late former Speaker Agunwa Adekwe. At a special valedictory session, Speaker Abbas Tajuddin described him as a leader who strengthened Nigeria's legislature through integrity and not ambition.
It was a solemn occasion with the body of the late former Speaker of the House of Representatives, Agunwa Adekwe, lying in state at the foyer of the National Assembly complex. At a young age of 36, Adekwe presided as Speaker of the House of Representatives between 1992 and 1993, and parliamentarians in this special valedictory session eulogized him as a principled advocate of democratic ideals who contributed immensely in shaping the moral compass of the legislature.
He upheld the sanctity of this House and demonstrated that even in turbulent periods, legislative order can be preserved.
When the military enacted a decree that limited the powers of the House, Honorable Agwa Onakwe, as the Speaker of the House of Representatives, not only preached the gospel of democracy, but championed that cause and practicalized it by standing firmly against that obnoxious and draconian decree.
Even when the military struck on November 17, 1993, Right Honorable Agunwa Adekwe was determined to reconvene the House of Representatives.
He will be remembered by the things he handed out to others and by the lives he touched.
There were requests to immortalize the late former Speaker.
Asked the federal government to name a national monument after this former Speaker.
Our National Assembly then had many entitlements that the government should settle.
We are comforted by the very kind words that have been said about him today.
As the House adjourns plenary for the day to honor the former Speaker who died in July this year, his homeward journey terminates with funeral rites at his country home in Anambra State.
Meanwhile, the House of Representatives is demanding answers over the abandoned modular refinery project in Bayelsa State. And this is in spite of an investment of $35 million. The lawmakers say funds committed through the Nigerian Content Development and Monitoring Board must be fully accounted for.
Sometime in 2020, the Nigerian Content Development and Monitoring Board, otherwise known as NCDMB, invested the sum of $35 million in Atlantic International Refinery and Petrochemical Limited, a modular refinery to be located in Bras. Despite this huge investment, which is more than 50 billion naira today, and enough to fund fundamental components of the national budget, the proposed modular refinery was never set up.
It appears today that we're a nation that will not only eat our profit, but will also eat her investment.
The House mandated its committees on petroleum resources, midstream and downstream to investigate what went wrong with the proposed modular refinery project. Meanwhile, the House is set to probe alleged local content violations by oil and gas companies in Imo State to the detriment of host communities.
Failure to establish functional operational offices within their areas of operation in Imo State, as mandated by Section 3J of the Act 2010, thereby denying the state by valuable economic activity and employment. To urge the oil and gas companies operating in Imo State to urgently comply with provisions of Nigerian oil and gas industry.
At a public hearing, lawmakers and aviation experts endorsed a proposed legislation seeking to establish the African Aviation and Aerospace University in Abuja.
We must ensure that the institution is not only a center of excellence, but also a model of integrity. This momentous occasion underscores the federal government's commitment to developing our aviation sector,
support Nigeria's vision to become Africa's leading aviation training and innovation hub.
They are optimistic that the proposed aviation university will address shortage of manpower in the sector.
Also at Wednesday's plenary, Representative Clement Jimbo from Abak, Etimekpo, Ika Federal Constituency of Akwa Ibom State, raised concern over the use of hazardous pesticides in food production and preservation. He is calling for urgent action to stop the practice and reduce the risks to public health. We caught up with the member right after plenary for more insight.
It was a time we had engagement to do outside the shores of Nigeria, precisely the United Kingdom. And I went out to look for Nigerian delicacies. And I happened to find a store that sells almost everything that we consume in Nigeria. And it was managed by a Nigerian. So we interacted. And one of the concerns he told us was clearly that the UK government does not joke with what comes into their country. And for every single item that will pass through their borders to enter into the country of UK, for them to consume must be adequately checked. They screen it to be sure that it complies with all their laid down guidelines and procedures in terms of the chemical content, the nature of preservatives and all that. That one of the challenges they are facing is that many of our products sometimes do not scale through those tiny scrutinies. And the danger of it is that the moment it fails, they destroy the goods right before you. So imagine somebody bringing in a goods of maybe billions of naira and it failed the test. You just see that your entire capital is sunk and destroyed. So, when that happened, we need to trace it back to how do we cultivate our crops? Are we leveraging on modern technologies? Are we using the modern ways of preserving our foods? And so we need to follow all that. And if you observe too, many of our chemicals that many of our farmers are using here, they are to some extent hazardous. Even these days, you want to do away with some Anopheles mosquitoes in your room and you buy an insecticide to spray. You discover that at the end, you cannot even sleep in the house. You need to expose the house to a lot of ventilation before you can now come in. If you need to go to that extent to kill a mosquito, which invariably affects humans, so what are you really killing? Are you sure it is mosquito that you really want to kill? And that calls for concern as Nigerians, because if most of these things are equally produced locally here, we can regulate it effectively. Because what a lot of people may not know is that it's not all the nations out there that are really interested in the development of Nigeria. Some would deliberately and intentionally weaponize some things that we consume in our nation. And if we are not careful, we buy those things in their numbers and we circulate it into our population. So part of the prayers in the motion is equally to call on the NAFDAC to gradually phase out most of these dangerous chemicals, because we don't need them. NAFDA really need to brace up. A whole lot needs to be encouraged by, a whole lot of encouragement needs to be sent to NAFDAC to be up and doing. I wish the the former name that was everywhere. In fact, let me equally say this. Who actually brought NAFDAC into the mainstream for everybody to know? Before late Dr. Dora Okunyili, nobody really knew about NAFDAC. And in those dark days, what happened? So it was free for all until late Dr. Dora Okunyili, may her soul rest in perfect peace, came and said no. So we really need to keep the fire burning and checkmate what filters into our country. And one of it is this pesticide. Sometimes these days you don't even need to weed your farm again. You simply spray chemicals. And when you are spraying, they say it's selective herbicide. You spray the chemicals to kill the weeds. So what affect? Are you telling me that it does not affect the crop, the product, even the soil? How long does this chemical need to stay in the soil? So it's a whole lot of concern. I did a little of chemistry, but it was not at this level. There are those that are really trained in this thing to really look at holistically what we are actually up against as a nation.
And the House of Representatives is stepping in to resolve the ongoing face-off between the federal government and the Academic Staff Union of Universities. Lawmakers have set up an ad hoc committee led by Speaker Tajuddin Abbas to find common ground and help bring the 2-week strike to an end.
Lawmakers are concerned that ASU's 2-week warning strike could snowball into a bigger crisis that will deepen the frustrations of students, parents, and lecturers. They warn that time is of the essence to broker a deal between the federal government and ASU.
The House urged both parties to exercise restraint, embrace constructive dialogue, and prioritize the interests of students and national development above all other considerations.
Meanwhile, the House resolved to investigate a petition brought against the Joint Admission and Matriculation Board over age restriction policy.
For enforcing an illegal and arbitrary admission age restriction policy in contempt of the judgments of 2 superior courts of records in disregard to the fundamental rights of affected candidates and a resolution of the House of Representatives.
To expand maritime infrastructure and boost the blue economy in line with the renewed hope agenda of the federal government, lawmakers advocate more deep-sea ports.
Urge the federal government through Ministry of Marine and Blue Economy and other relevant agencies to initiate a collaborative framework with the government of Akwa Ibom State for the establishment and realization of the Ibom deep sea ports that could attract investment worth over $5.6 billion.
Following renewed bandit attacks in parts of Sokoto State, the House called for intensified military onslaught.
Urge the Nigerian Armed Forces to immediately reinforce deployment and enhance joint operations in Kuchi area of Kebe Tambuwal local government to secure lives, property, and farmlands. Mandate the committees on ECOWAS Parliament and Foreign Affairs to help normalize relations with neighboring states, especially Niger Republic, to enable cross-border intelligence sharing.
Governor Uba Sani of Kaduna State was in plenary to witness the formal defection of 3 lawmakers from his state who left the PDP for APC.
This week on Legislative Terms and Tools, we are defining matter of urgent public importance. It is one of the fastest ways lawmakers draw attention to pressing national issues. But what exactly qualifies as urgent, and how does the process work? Let's find out. This week, on our committee segment, we catch up with Representative Clement Jimbo, member of the House Committee on Constitution Review. He shares insights on the 10th House's priorities and what to expect as the review process gathers steam.
In the House of Representatives Constitutional Review Committee, we've had a series of engagement. So at this point, we can say for sure what Nigerians want, not just the House. Even though we represent the people, but you cannot actually amend the ground norms of our country without constantly filtering it through the eyes and the pulse of the people, which are the Nigerian people. So clearly, I can tell you here for free, and I can tell Nigerians that Nigerians are indeed interested in what is called state policy, which falls under the devolution of power. Nigerians are equally very, very interested in the autonomy of local government areas. In fact, the last retreat we just came back from Enugu, at the committee level, we gave the full complement of the tier of government to the local government area, where instead of a local government chairman to stay in the office for 3 years, as it is currently the constitution, we say, why not? If we have given them the full complement of the tier of government, if the president stays in the office for 4 years and re-elected for another 4 years, the same thing should also happen at the local government level. So if it is generally approved by the entire House and by the Senate, and also approved by the two-thirds majority of the state houses of assembly, then a local government chairman that is elected will stay in the office for 4 years. Also, money that is meant for local government areas will equally go to local government areas directly. So I can equally tell you for free, and Nigerians, of course, that Nigerians are equally interested in the autonomy of local government system. And that is what the committee is equally interested in giving to Nigerians. Then we also talked about at the committee level where we have equally prioritized this special seat for women, for our women. Yes, it's noted. Nigerians, especially the women folk and many of the men folk as well, has come to embrace the uniqueness of our women when they are more in parliament. And now we can equally open our arms and bring them into our fold. And we have seen clearly that they equally have the number. They have the brains, the intellects, the capacity to equally influence things positively, at least from the few ones we have in the House of Reps. So what we were actually dealing with was, what is the operationalization? We are saying that let the women come in, let's give them special seat, but how do we go about electing them to come into the House? Because obviously we are not creating additional federal constituency for them. We are not equally creating additional senatorial district for them or state constituency for them. So where do they fit in? So there is a work in progress. But part of the suggestion that I placed before the committee was very simple. Every single woman and every single man comes from a federal constituency, an equally senatorial district. So under this special arrangement, whoever wins under this special arrangement as a woman and comes to the House, let us still represent that same constituency. And it can be maybe a favor to that constituency, because obviously there will be a man that will be elected, and it can equally be a woman. This additional 36 is exclusively for women, but the 360 is not exclusively for men. So obviously there are some federal constituencies that under this 360 that women will vie for, and they win. So if a woman wins from the pool of 360 federal constituency, and from the special arrangement, a woman also win from that special arrangement, obviously we'll have a federal constituency in Nigeria that will have 2 women that represents those federal constituencies, and that will be a plus for democracy and for the women folk. So let them vie for election, campaign within the federal constituency, win election within the federal constituency, come to the House and represent that same federal constituency. So it becomes a favor and a blessing to that federal constituency. So instead of one person representing that federal constituency, we have two members representing that federal constituency, and it makes the whole work easy. Some people canvass the opinion that, okay, since it is a special arrangement, a special seat, let a woman so elected under this arrangement represent the women folk in the state. And I still disagree. I said, no, let the woman not be burdened with representing the entire state. For example, if you look Lagos State for an example, Lagos State has a population of about 30 million people. And if you look at the ratio of men-women ratio, let's say 60-40, are you telling us that you are going to burden that woman with representing over 12 million women in a place like Lagos State because you want her to represent the entire state? Obviously, it will be an injustice. So let us still focus on the constituency that she represents. And since this thing is going to be rotational in the state, based on the political party, so eventually this special favor will circulate among all the federal constituencies in the state.
And that's you and your reps this week. With lawmakers now fully back to business after the recess, the pace at the People's House is picking up once again. Thank you so very much for staying with us. I'm Victor Azu. I'll see you next time.